All right, so this recording is the last DIY recording, and for this one I went to the Clark County Museum, or Clark County Heritage Museum, as it's also called, and this was it's a local museum, government government controlled, and it's only $2 of entry, so it's effectively free, and it's a very good museum, focused on local history the of Clark County and the Las Vegas Valley more specifically. You start with the prehistory, start with the Pleistocene, start with the dire wolf, the different Pleistocene animals, right? Which you always have to start that way, and then a few portions about Native Americans who lived either in the valley or in the areas around the valley. Um, like the Southern Paiutes, like the Mojave people from whom the desert is named after, etc., etc. Um, and then going into the first attempts to settle the area by the Mormons, which failed, and then how the modern sort of foundation of the city in the early 1900s, when a railroad company basically had a large land auction that led to the area really being settled with a population, goes through the whole eras, the construction of the Hoover Dam, and how that led to a huge boon in tourism. The earliest bits of Las Vegas tourism were sort of from people going to see the Hoover Dam and then staying nearby. And Las Vegas apparently advertised itself as like the last frontier town, had a very Western theme, going on. And gambling that already existed but only became prominent a little later. And then, of course, it expands over time to capitalize even further on the tourist market, and eventually you get the Vegas we have today. And it's a very good museum. You have there's multiple exhibits you can touch, for example, just to things like that, different objects. It has a whole section on the McCarran Airport and the aviation there. It has old slot machines, has a lot of mannequins. I'm showing a video, and you can certainly see many of these areas have these mannequins, right? Dressed in the contemporary style, and a lot of them corresponding to specific people. Um, it's very well done, very well done. And besides the museum, there was a second outside portion which has actual historical buildings that were relocated next to the museum, and they'll have mannequins, that look like the people who used to live there with different furniture corresponding to the era, informational plaques. It's really very interesting. Um, these old houses, a chapel that was big in like Las Vegas for a while, a popular thing to go to get weddings, a printing house, all these bits of history, and uh, it was really a very wonderful experience. There's my whole spiel of the museum. Um, and what was really interesting was that this museum, as far as I could tell, it wasn't a tourist attraction. It was originally from a collection from a local who was just collecting certain historic artifacts, and eventually donated it, starting the museum, and the collection's been building over time. And it, again, as far as I can tell, isn't really meant for tourists. It's a government thing. Again, it's $2 for entry. No, they're not making a profit off of this. Um, but it was this sort of a slice of home, if you will, all the different eras of the habitation here, right? And all these historic houses, which were just places people lived in, right? But there's the importance. Like, this was the house of this guy who lived here, and he was an engineer who worked on the dam, and yada yada. It's just a local. This all reminded me of the very end of The Art of Travel, where it's just on habit, and it's talking about how we need to see the differences in our own world. That's all the trip around my bedroom, right? This isn't necessarily a trip around my bedroom, but it's a similar purpose, right? This is more for the locals, and it's meant to give a slice of local history. And all these houses, for example, theirs are mundane things, right? It's literally just the place a person lived in, but now it's a historical artifact. Here's the quote, related, right? Home, by contrast, finds us more settled in our expectations. We feel assured that we have discovered everything interesting about our neighborhood, primarily by virtue of having lived there a long time. But here's all these bits of history that I didn't know about, and more importantly, the idea that, for example, a man's house might happen to be history in the future. Everything of how people live in a place is itself part of history and part of the collective knowledge of mankind. And even the little mundane things we do can themselves be interesting in the future, can themselves be, have meaning and say something about humanity in this place and as a whole. Um, so, made me think of how we need to pay more attention to that. It's an interesting conclusion, isn't it?